My name is Caroline Diarte Edwards. I'm a director at Fortuna, and before joining Fortuna, I was Director of Admissions, Financial Aid and Marketing at INSEAD for the full-time MBA. And with me, we have Judith Silverman Hodara, who was Head of Admissions at the Wharton MBA Program.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be with you this morning.
And thanks for joining, Judith.
Great.
So today, we're going to talk about the roadmap to business schools. So for those of you who are perhaps a few months ahead of applying, we're going to be talking about what you should be doing over the coming months to get well prepared, so that when it comes time to submit, you're ready and have been able to do all that you can to maximize your chances of admission. And before we dive in, a few words about Fortuna Admissions. It's a team of ex-senior staff from top business schools. So you can see on the screen here the various schools where we have worked. And we put this team together, and we started about 5 years ago, really with the aim of bringing together experts who can offer the inside track on what it takes to get into business school, and who have the behind-the-scenes understanding of how an admissions committee really does evaluate your candidacy, and can advise you in that context, how you can best present your story to really make the most of your opportunity to present yourself to the school and hopefully gain admission. We can go to the next slide, Hayley. And also before we go any further, I wanted to mention that if you have any technical problems during this session, you can send a message to Melissa Jones in the chat box. Melissa is here behind the scenes and can help you with any questions you have with the audio or with viewing the screen. I would also request that if you have any questions that you'd like to ask us, we're going to have some time for Q&A at the end. So anytime you think of a question, please type it into the questions box that you see on your control panel on the right. Feel free to enter questions at any time, and then we will go through those at the end of the session. So this is our plan for today's webinar. We'll be talking about why you would consider applying for an MBA. Some of you may be unsure about whether it's the right next step for you. Then we'll talk about how to go about choosing which programs to apply to and how to formulate a target list of schools. Then we'll give you some tips on the process of applying and the various things that you'll have to do, and how to plan out the various elements of your candidacy and presenting your application. And then we'll talk about a timeline for the coming months. And as I said, we'll get to your questions at the end. So hopefully we'll have about 10-15 minutes at the end for your questions. So I think Judith is now going to talk about why apply for an MBA program.
Great. So I wanted to discuss this morning the reasons that you might be thinking about applying to an MBA. Certainly some of these are pretty clear to you all as you begin to think about next steps in your professional and personal development. Without saying, any opportunity to continue to build your business skills and to really deepen your knowledge is going to be very important. Most of you, or many of you, have been working probably for somewhere between 1 year and 5 years at this point. You're thinking about next steps. You're thinking about what you don't know. And business school in that 1 or 2 year opportunity is a tremendous way to really dive into the things that you haven't learned so far in your careers, to expose you to different ways of thinking, and really to allow you the opportunity to take 2 years out, or in 1 year in some cases, and really spend time honing and sharpening that skill and building on your foundation. It also will allow you incredible exposure to many, many different industries that perhaps you haven't considered. You've always been interested in consulting, you're not exactly sure what it entails, you want to learn more about it, you want to be in class with people that perhaps have been in investment banking, or you're interested in what it takes to run a nonprofit. So incredible opportunities for you, both in class, through your faculty, and as well through guest speakers and various other kinds of activities that are going to be going on campus. So where else can you really sit down and listen to people that are doing the kinds of things in real estate or manufacturing or technology that you're interested to learn more about, but don't really know where to start. So this is a wonderful way for you to kind of, as they say, drink from the fire hose and get tremendous opportunities to engage with individuals from various backgrounds. And access to a network cannot be underestimated. Not only the network of the individuals that you're in class with, but those alumni that have come before you. And in some cases, in some of the larger programs, this can be 800 or 900 people a year. So the opportunity to connect with these individuals for your own career trajectory, for your own ideas, for your professional and personal growth, plus the fact that these people in many cases might know people that you also want to know. So the networking capabilities really is going to be a very, very important reason that many people will choose to go to business school. Generally, we suggest that you don't have that as your number one reason. We tend to, especially with the students that we work with, suggest that you might want to talk about building your business schools and getting some exposure. But again, that access to that network is going to be incredibly important for those of you moving ahead in your own careers. A career acceleration and a career change. Again, many of you have been in the workforce for between 1 and 5 years. I'm just sort of hazarding a guess here. And some of you may be interested in continuing in your own fields. You need the MBA in order to get that promotion, in order to take on new responsibility within the framework of your organization. And for some of you, you're interested in doing something very different than you have been doing so far. So instead of starting from scratch, how do you do this? How do you build on what you've been doing so far and move into a different industry? The greatest way you can do that is by rebuilding your foundation, adding to it, and also tremendous exposure to individuals in these fields as well. So you never know if you're interested in moving into supply chain management, for example. You may be sitting next to someone that's been doing this in the military for 10 years and really knows the right people for you to talk with if you decide to go down that path. So both career acceleration and career change, very, very big reasons that individuals may choose to go to business school. Where else really can you find the opportunity to say, okay, here I am, it's 2017, this is what I do now, but I really want to be doing something different in 2019. So how am I going to make that happen? And then lastly, the ROI, really incredible opportunity for you financially, for the return on investment. Certainly business school is not an insignificant cost, but hopefully, and we do know that if you're looking at what that will bring you back as far as your personal growth, as far as your financial growth, that cannot be underestimated as well. So certainly all of these reasons are incredibly valid and important ways for you to think about why it is that you might want to continue with your education. We really like to do this discussion in January because we feel like you're just starting out and just getting some ideas under your belt about why you want to do this. So these, again, are sort of the 5 or 6 common reasons that individuals may just choose to pursue an MBA. And we can go on to the next slide.
Thank you, Judith. So I wanted to talk about how to go about choosing an MBA program. And I think that often candidates formulate the target list of schools too quickly. And so I would encourage you at this stage, and if you're thinking, as Judith said, you know, you've got several months ahead of you, maybe applying later in the year, in the fall season, you've got the luxury of some time. And so at this stage, I would say, you know, keep an open mind, have a long list of schools on your radar screen before you put together your shortlist. Too often, candidates put together their shortlist of schools based on what their friends and family think about the school they should go to, where their colleagues have been to business school, often on the basis of the latest MBA ranking. Now, of course, you know, take those data points into account, but initially keep an open mind, because an MBA is a very complex offering. There's a lot of things to take into account and a lot of variables that you should research before you decide which school is really the right fit for you. So we've got some of those different criteria here on the screen. So, I mean, first of all, ranking and recognition, and that also does link to the MBA rankings that are published every year. But be aware that the rankings, they do get shuffled around regularly. The publications are, of course, trying to make a story each time that they publish a ranking. So if they published exactly the same ranking every year, then there would be no story to tell. So do take them with a pinch of salt. And also look into exactly what they're measuring, because different rankings are using different data points. Those data points may have a lot of relevance for you, or they may not have a lot of relevance for you. So do look beyond the face value of the list, and read the research that goes into those rankings, because you may find that very useful, and would give you more insight into the variables and the differences across the different schools. I would say that, Judith mentioned return on investment earlier, that, the top programs typically do generate higher return on investment. So I would encourage you to try to get into the best program that you can that is a good fit for you. And sometimes, we have clients who get admitted to one of the say top 5 programs, and then they get admitted to a lower ranked school with a scholarship offer, and that can be a very difficult decision. In general, I would advise people to take the offer of the best school that you're able to get into. In the longer term, that is likely to pay more dividends. But when looking at which are the top schools, don't get too concerned about which school right now is number 1, which is number 2, which is number 3. Look at clusters of schools. That's really an indicator of quality. You should be less concerned about whether a school is number 3 or number 4 in the ranking than, is it in the top 10? Is it in a group of schools that consistently delivers high quality and has a great community and offers you great recruitment opportunities. So think about rankings in terms of groupings of schools that are peer schools rather than a very precise order. And when you're thinking about these different criteria, you need to think about what your priorities are and what is going to pay dividends for you in the longer term. And so, there are a lot of differences to take into account. Location, you could be studying in a big city, in a place like New York or London, where you're really at the heart of a financial center, and a lot of networking opportunities for specific industries that you may be interested in. On the other hand, some candidates like the idea of going to a smaller town and getting out of the rat race for a year and being in a very different environment, because probably before and after the MBA program you're likely going to be in a very urban environment for some time. So having a break and being in a very different location can be attractive. And typically also schools that are in more remote locations, smaller towns, have very close networks, so that does have an impact on the type of community and the feel of the community that you may find yourself in. Program length, there are more and more one-year programs, especially the non-US programs, INSEAD, Oxford, Cambridge, HEC, and so on in Europe offer the one-year format, and that also might be appealing if, for example, you're a few years into your career, maybe you've been working already for 4 or 5 years, and you're not sure that it's the right thing for you to take a full 2 years out of your career. So one-year program could be a great option to consider. Network, as Judith mentioned, that's a huge asset that you gain when you go to business school. Think about the composition of the network that you're going to get access to and the level of network that you're going to get access to, and is that going to be relevant to your future career? And another consideration is, where will that network be? I worked at INSEAD, I did my MBA at INSEAD. INSEAD has a very, very international network. So, wherever you go in the world, you'll likely be able to find some INSEAD alumni who can help open doors, who will, be happy to meet up with you. And that's a great asset if you think you're going to be internationally mobile in the future. If you're in the US and you're thinking that you want to stay in the US post-MBA and for the longer term, then you may well be better off focusing on one of the top US schools, which is going to give you a fantastic network that is very much concentrated in the US. So think about, what type of network is going to be relevant for you in the short, the medium, and the longer term. Culture, different schools do have a very different feel. And I would encourage you, if at all possible, to visit the campuses where you're considering applying. There's really nothing like getting a first-hand feel for the environment and actually being able to hang out on campus and chat with students and meet faculty and meet the staff. You will get a very clear feeling of whether that is the right environment, whether those people inspire you, whether you want to be part of that community or not. And you can learn a lot about the schools now with all of the online resources, but there's really, hopefully you can meet people and talk to alumni, perhaps in your hometown. But if at all possible, I would really say that there is no replacement for actually getting to the school and sitting in on a class and getting that first-hand sense. Judith talked about recruitment opportunities. I would encourage you to delve into detail in the recruitment statistics that the schools publish to see, if the career paths that you're looking at post-MBA are really on offer. Are the recruiters that you're considering that you target companies? Do they regularly come to the school? And you can also, look at to what extent students are able to make a career change. If you're looking to make some sort of geography change, you want to switch to work in a different country, access international opportunities. You can see all of that data in the recruitment report, so do take the time to delve through that as well. Cost, one variable there may be, if you're considering a 1-year versus 2-year program. So typically 1-year programs have a very good return on investment because, of course, you're paying tuition and foregoing a salary for 1 year rather than 2. So for some of you, that may be a consideration. We'll go on to the next page. Thank you. Over to you, Judith.
Sure. So we wanted to talk with you about how to apply to business school, which from where you're sitting probably seems like a very large and daunting project. But we, over the years, have sort of figured out that it's really quite manageable if you break it down into kind of discrete projects. So the first one is that we really want you to do your research. There's no doubt that that ignoring kind of your gut instincts and spending some time on campus is really going to give you a list that may or may not be in tune with where you really belong and where you're going to be a valuable part of the community. So I know it's tempting to just look at the rankings in the Financial Times or in the Economist, and we really encourage you to spend some time checking your gut and making sure that you see yourself on a campus and in an environment that's going to allow you to thrive. Without a doubt, visiting the campus is so important if you can, and if it's not going to, cost you too much for those of you from abroad, or if it's going to be possible for you to do a few schools at the same time. I also really encourage you to go on a day that they're not necessarily rolling out the red carpet. So, of course, those big days that they put on for different student groups are terrific, but if you could just go on a normal Wednesday and sit in on classes, understand how they teach, talk to people in the hallways. Sometimes when people are really not all gussied up and expecting you, it's really when you get a terrific picture of what that campus and that environment is going to be all about. You certainly should plan to attend local events if you can, and really that's a wonderful way to meet with members of the admissions team and also to interact with alumni, which is going to be such an important part of you understanding the school. With LinkedIn and the opportunity to network, again, for those of you that are using LinkedIn or Facebook, great way to take an opportunity to reach out to alumni. Find out what they liked about the program. Find out what they didn't like. I personally recommend talking with alumni that are 5 years out and alumni that are 20 years out, because between the two of them, you're going to get a great sense of where is my career and my personal life going to go after I graduate, and where might it be 10 or 15 years from now. So make sure as you contact alumni, you're not looking at all the people that just graduated last year, that you really broaden that base. One additional thing about attending events, you don't necessarily have to go in person. If the schools have a webinar, if they're hosting an opportunity for you to chat with current students online, all of these are such valuable ways for you to learn more about the program. Clearly, you want to take the time to understand what drives each of these schools. The values of each of these programs are so different from one another. And not just to read it or skim it on their website, but to really think about where that shows up. Is globalism important to them? Is doing well by doing good important? Are big ideas important? You know, how are these things the pillars of these institutions, and how are they driving the culture at the schools as well? So although it sounds a bit esoteric, the programs and values, in addition to sort of the details of what you're going to be doing there, are going to be really critical parts of your figuring out where are going to be the best places and the right fits for you to apply. And then lastly, never too much time spent on how the MBA fits with your career. This is a very big question. It is sometimes a question that students don't always think about until farther on down the path. We really recommend taking your time, starting to map this out a little bit. Where do you envision yourself? How do you think you're going to get there? What will the MBA allow you to do academically and extracurricularly that's going to eventually make a great fit with where you want to go? So it's not just about how am I going to make the most money, or how am I going to have the best title, but how will your work and your life really grow in a symbiotic way, and how are you going to be able to use the MBA program, which, don't forget, is 1 or 2 years, and you're really looking at over $100,000 at least, and want to make sure that you're really thoughtful about how that all is going to tie in with your future career path. And we can go on to the next.
Thank you, Judith. So I wanted to talk a bit about timing, because you need to really sort of plan out the coming months and think carefully about what you need to do when, and sort of work back from the deadlines. Most of the schools have 3 rounds of admissions in the US. With the European schools, 4 or more rounds are quite common. For the schools that will be starting deadlines with round 1 falling in September or October, typically the deadlines will be released in June or July. And then at the same time, they will also publish their requirements, any updates on the essays, any changes to the requirements for recommendations, and so on will be released at the same time. And you should be aware that for the very top schools, typically, a huge chunk of the places are offered in round 1 and round 2. So as you can see, we've got on the screen, 40 to 50% of the places are offered in each of rounds 1 and 2. So there may only be a handful of places left when you get to round 3. And given the level of competition that you face already in round 1 and round 2, which is increasingly difficult and challenging for particularly for the top 5 to 10 US schools, we would encourage you very, very strongly to apply in round 1 and round 2, rather than waiting later in the game. Now, as I said, that's really for the very top schools. For schools that are a little bit further down in the rankings, there is more flexibility. So you could think about applying to some of those schools later on. I also mentioned that with the European schools and with INSEAD, which doesn't really see itself as a European school with a Singapore campus, but those schools will have more deadlines, and that gives you a bit more flexibility. And also, there isn't quite the same pressure on the initial rounds. So if you're considering those options as well, you could potentially, if you're looking at some top US schools, you're looking at some international schools, I would suggest focusing your efforts initially on the top US schools. And most people we see really need about 3 to 4 months to prepare a really strong application. So given that the deadlines have been creeping earlier and earlier over the past few years, so in the past, deadlines would typically start in October. Now some of them are starting in September. So we're not far away from when you should start to be thinking really seriously about getting your ducks into line for your applications. So think about having a target list of schools and the order in which you're going to apply to the schools. What we see is that sometimes candidates tend to sort of overstretch themselves and apply to a laundry list of schools all in the same round. And it's very difficult to do yourself justice to more than, I would say, more than about 3 schools per round can get quite tricky. Because it's not just all the work that you have to do, you're also making demands of your recommenders. And now, fortunately, some of the US schools are using common recommendation questions, so that does make life a bit easier for your recommenders, but not all of the schools are using those, and the international schools will have different questions entirely. And you want to make sure that your recommenders are able to dedicate the necessary time to write fantastic letters for you for each school and not feel rushed and harried and be dashing something off that doesn't do you justice. So think very carefully about prioritizing where you're going to apply and when. My typical strategy is that people will apply to their number 1, the number 2, number 3 choice in the first round, and then apply to further schools in round 2. However, the converse strategy can also work well, because typically schools that are that are a little bit below the top 5 schools will see a big bump in application volume in the second round, because they're getting applications from people who've applied to the top schools in round 1 and haven't been admitted, and so moving further down their list. And so if you apply earlier, then they will see that as a sign that, you know, they are up there on your list and you're committed to that school. And so it's easier to present yourself as a really committed candidate in round 1 for those schools than it is for round 2. So in some cases, it could work well for you to consider applying to schools that are a little bit further down your list in round 1. Also, bear in mind that when you go through the application process, you're going to go through a huge learning curve. You know, learning how to present yourself well in an application is not something that you figure out overnight. And so actually going through the process of applying with a school that is maybe not your number 1 choice in the first round can actually, you know, enable you to gain a lot from that experience and be better positioned to write an even better application for your number 1 school in round 2. Okay, we can move on.
We wanted to discuss how you should and can really take a step back and think about your candidacy. It is a luxury to be able to do so. And we're not suggesting that you sit down on a Sunday night and say, right, where am I and where do I want to go? But it's a really good time to start to kind of have conversations with people and think about, where am I? How do I get to where I want to be next? What are the kinds of things that I think that I need to learn, and what are the kinds of things that I think I need to do? So thinking about a list of questions regarding your own aptitude, your own background, going all the way back to college and thinking about your quantitative background, the classes you enjoyed, the ways that you were a member of your community, leadership and opportunities in your current position. What are some things that perhaps your supervisors have said you need to work on? What are some of the things that they applaud as strengths of yours? And really, it is, again, I use the word luxury, but to take a minute and say, like, what do I like to do? You know, what is really going to be something that's going to excite me in my career path? Where do I want to put my energies? Because most of you, you know, are going to be working for a couple more decades, which I know sounds very scary right now. And it's a terrific way for you to say, you know, I really want to work in this kind of environment, or I really deeply care about this cause, or I've been living in this kind of place and I don't think it's a good fit for me and I need to transition. So all of these things are the chance for you to take a minute or 2 or 10 and begin to plot what happens next. So it is very introspective. it is the time that you can really sit down with some good friends and say, so, where do you see me? What do you imagine are going to be the ways that I can move forward? Sometimes it's a little hard to do it all on your own. Ask your parents. If you feel comfortable doing that, sometimes parents have terrific ideas about the strengths that they think that you have, how they see you the happiest, how they've noticed over the years that things haven't clicked with you. So this is, again, one of those preparation pieces that we think is really important. It is much easier to go straight to the task of writing the essays and figuring out how to calculate your GPA and getting your recommenders lined up, right? That's all really tactical, but there is no doubt, and all of our expert coaches begin with this piece, that taking a deep breath, seeing where you are and where you want to go, which right now may seem a really far way away, but it is a terrific way to really start that process.
Thank you. So I want to talk about how to prepare academically and how to think about presenting your academic profile to business school. And sometimes candidates underestimate a little bit the importance of their academic profile if they have a very, very strong professional track record. And it's true that schools will be looking at your profile holistically, and certain elements may shine more than others. That's absolutely fine. But the top schools are very, very intense and very demanding academic programs. And what the admissions committee is looking for is to really have some certainty that you are going to succeed academically on the program. The last thing they want to do is to admit someone who's going to struggle academically, who's going to be failing exams, who may even fall out of the program and fail at the end of the day. They really want to be bringing people in who are going to flourish in a very, very demanding academic environment. So they will be scrutinizing in detail your academic profile. They'll be looking at where you studied for your undergraduate, the quality of the institution you attended. They'll be looking at what you studied. They're going to be scrutinizing your transcripts to see the grades that you got for different courses. And then, of course, they'll be looking at your GMAT or your GRE. Now, you can balance things out to a certain extent. So if you have an undergraduate track record that is not fantastic in some way, then it would definitely be helpful to have an above average GMAT for the school that you're applying to. So look at the average GMAT scores that people are getting who are admitted to the program. You can also look at the range of scores of people on the program to give you a sense of what you need to get to really be competitive. And I know that some of you may be skeptical about the value of the GMAT, and I well remember taking it myself and thinking, of what relevance is this to being good in business and having the ability to be successful at business school. And then later on, when I joined INSEAD as Director of Admissions, one of the first things I did was to do some statistical analysis to look at the correlation between some of the data that we collected about candidates during the admissions process, and then how people did academically and how they did post-MBA. And actually, one of the strongest correlations, or I think the strongest correlation we saw between any of those factors was between the GMAT and academic performance on the INSEAD MBA program. So that did not give me much ammunition when I was discussing intensely on the admissions committee with some of the faculty who would be determined not to admit someone who they thought wasn't up to scratch academically, where we felt that overall the profile was really exciting. We wanted to admit them to the program. So give yourself the best chance you can. A lot of the schools will, they'll have a mix of people looking at your application during the process. As I said, INSEAD, about half of the admissions committee is composed of faculty, and their concern is to make sure that they get the smartest students in the classroom. And so you don't want someone to be arguing against you when your file gets to that stage. So take the time to prepare well for the GMAT. Most people do need a few months to prepare and to get the best score that they can. There are a lucky few who are able to walk into the test center and get a great score, having only done a few hours of preparation, but that is extremely rare. So give yourself the chance. If you're looking at applying to business school later on this year, you have the time to start some committed study now and dedicate yourself to that in your spare time over the coming months, so that you can get your test out of the way and have a good score before you need to start working on your applications, because it's a lot to juggle. And I know that many of you may have very long hours to work for your day job. It's not easy. I well remember coming home after work and plowing through GMAT prep and doing that at the weekends. There are a lot more fun things to be doing, but hopefully it will pay dividends for you. So give yourself the best chance you can with the GMAT, and also build in some buffer time. A lot of people end up having to take the test more than once. That's absolutely fine. And in fact, GMAT has changed the rules so that, whereas in the past, if you took the test, it would appear on the test transcript, the report that would go to the schools that you're applying to. Now you can take the test and cancel it if you don't like the score that you see on the screen at the end of the test, and the schools will never know that you've done that. So that gives you a bit of freedom to take the test more than once, or more frequently if you feel that you need to, without creating a transcript that might look damaging in some way. So build in some buffer time so that if you need to take it more than once, or even 2 or 3 times, then you've got plenty of time to do so. Moving on.
Clearly, you want to spend some time thinking about your resume and the online forms. This is the thing that I hear so often on January 1st when the applications are due the 2nd. I didn't think about the online forms. You didn't tell me they were going to be so long and tedious. Those forms, I know it sounds funny, but they really do take a lot of time. And in some cases, I'm going to tell you to start that almost really early. And it's not just filling in the blanks. A lot of the schools are going to want to know why you decided to leave specific organizations. They're going to want short essays on different kinds of impacts you've had in your career. So I know this sounds like I'm pleading, but I kind of am, having just been through it. When you decide where you're going to be applying, you really want to take the time to get online and start to fill out those pesky forms, because you do not want to wait to the last moment. Your resume should be no more than 1 page in length, unless you've been working for over a decade and a half, and I'm guessing that many of you have not been. You want to be very clear about the impact that you had on your organization. You want to quantify that as much as possible. You did X, which resulted in Y. Y savings, Y increase, Y number of individuals. You really want to be able to say, this is how I left this position better than I found it. You are going to hopefully be showing a pattern of leadership and progression. So not just in title, but that the verbs that you're choosing, directed, instituted, inaugurated. I know that's a word for today, but you want to show that you really were a force behind projects that were going on at work. So that should really be showing up from college all the way through. And a word to the wise, if you do not have a lot of leadership within the framework of your work progression now, it is not too late to start asking for some. So taking on informal leadership roles outside of work, perhaps if you're involved with a rugby organization or you volunteer, lots of different ways in addition to the formalized leadership positions at work to really make your mark on a community. You want to make this very easy to read. You don't want to cram too much information in there. It goes without saying that current bullet points for current jobs, you're going to have more of those than you are for your first job out of undergraduate. It should be completely symmetrical. So however it is that you decide to indicate a city, if it's always bolded and underlined, for example, you want to do that all the way through. the more you edit the resume, the tighter it's going to be. So you want to really allow yourself the opportunity to take a deep breath and say, okay, this is what I'm presenting, but where am I? Where can I cut? Where can I make this tighter? And really, you do not want to be editing the night before this is due. So I would almost tell you to start working on a resume now and tweak it and tweak it and tweak it for the next number of months until you eventually, if you're applying in September. Because it is a very hard thing to do under pressure. And I know this because we always have students whose columns aren't lining up, or the font isn't right, or it's too wordy. So really, this is the kind of thing that you do want to start to tighten as soon as you can.
So moving on to the essays, Judith talked earlier about the importance of reflecting on your candidacy before you dive into the application, and that is really important, in particular for the essays. The essays are your opportunity to give some context to your application. You don't want to be just repeating things that are evident from your resume or from other parts of the application, but it's really a space where you can tell a bit more of your personal and professional story and perhaps present how you see your life unfolding after the MBA program. And you want to do it in such a way that you excite the file reader, you draw them into your story, and if you can draw them in and they end up feeling after they've read their essays that they are interested in you and they want to learn more, then they're much more likely to invite you to the next stage, which is, of course, the interview stage. So before you dive into writing the essays, take the time to reflect and think about what are the strengths of your candidacy, what are the things in your profile that may be relevant to business school, that will be interesting, that will make you a little bit different from other people in the classroom. And it could be your recent professional experience, it could be the mix of professional experience that you bring from different roles. It could be your life experience of perhaps living in different places or working with very different types of teams. There are lots of different ways that you can think about the experience that you've acquired over your life to this point in time and how that can make you a very special individual and someone who can bring something unique to the business school classroom. I'd also say that Judith and I have both, as admissions directors, read essays where clearly the candidate was trying to fit into the mold of what they thought we were looking for, and it doesn't serve the candidate well at all. Schools have essays partly because they want to get beyond the facts and figures of the resume. They want to get to know you as an individual and understand what it is that makes you tick, what do you care about, what are the key drivers in your life, and where do you see yourself going in the future. And if that is not authentic and it doesn't come across as genuine, then your application will get quite short shrift from the admissions committee. So finding your unique voice and figuring out how to convey that well in the essays is going to be very important for you. So as Judith mentioned just now, it's difficult to do a lot of this under pressure. So again, you need, and the essays take some time to mature. You'll probably go through several iterations. We would suggest that, start early with brainstorming some ideas. A lot of the essay questions these days are very open-ended. And so there's a lot of different ways, a lot of different strategies you could use for tackling those essays. And so you need to go through a process of brainstorming, probably through several iterations. Your essays will evolve over time. You should get feedback from other people. It's not going to be something that you can dash off overnight and do successfully. I would also say that there's less and less space in the essays. They have been shortened by some of the schools over time. And so you need to be very concise, and sometimes telling your story in a shorter space is more difficult than telling it with more words. So that may also be a challenge that you'll need to manage in thinking about how to be as concise and clear as possible with quite a limited amount of space.
So letters of recommendation are probably the biggest piece of the application that you are going to feel the most out of control with, just because you're really depending on another individual to help you out and to really listen to the kind of advice you're giving them, and then also get the application recommendation in on time, right? So you're sort of coaching them as much as you can, and then hoping that they do right by you. It is a little scary, admittedly. The one thing we can say is make it as easy as possible for your recommenders to support your candidacy. Give them the information that they're going to need in order to answer those questions. There are two main questions that are typically being asked by many of the schools, and some schools will have additional questions. But really, it's in what capacity do you know this individual? How do they compare to other peers in their group? And then secondly, what is it, some constructive criticism you've given them, and how did they respond? And again, some schools do have additional questions, but a couple of years ago, most of the M7 schools decided to streamline. So you want to provide your recommenders with enough of a briefing so that they're going to feel comfortable that they have examples to use. And while you're not writing it for them, they're not running around trying to scratch their head and say, well, what was some advice that I gave him 5 years ago and I don't remember. There's no doubt that sitting down, asking them if they'd be comfortable writing on your behalf, giving them enough time to do this, at least 2 months, giving them a reminder and an update, letting them know how you're doing in the application process is really important. I personally love hearing when someone I've written a letter for has come back and said, thanks, I got in, or thanks, I got an interview, or, it didn't work out, but thank you for your time. So you are going to want to have one of these from your immediate supervisor, unless there's some reason that you're worried about a chance of promotion or future compensation. And if that's the case, you can certainly, send in an additional note that explains that it wasn't possible for you to get a letter of rec. And you don't want to ask somebody that doesn't really know you. So getting the CEO of Coca-Cola is only going to work if you report directly to the CEO of Coca-Cola. There's no doubt that you want to get individuals that are going to be able to say specific instances of your engagement with that professional community. So again, although it sounds terrific to have the CEO, CFO, CTO, if they don't know you, don't ask them. Do not be afraid to coach your recommenders. And I know that sounds kind of uncomfortable for many of you. Here's someone that's doing you a favor. Here's someone you report to. But again, the more you can help them, the more they can help you. And that is without a doubt one of the most important lessons you can learn during the application process. Managing up is not always easy, but managing up can really help you to put that at ease. And once it's out of your hands, you can focus in on your own essays, resume, and online application.
So moving on to thinking about interviews, and it might sound a bit strange to be talking about interviews right now when perhaps several months away even from applying, but we would encourage you to think about the interviews well ahead of time. Now there are several different formats of interviews that schools run, so it's worth familiarizing yourself with what you should expect should you be invited to interview. And if you're attending campus events, if you're meeting current students or talking to alumni and having conversations with them about the school before you apply, do also ask them about the interview process and what to expect. If they've been through the interviews, there are students or alumni, ask them about their experience, because that will be very useful information for you when your turn comes. And when you start preparing for the interviews, then even if you have been through several job interviews, so you're quite practiced with going through interviews, do take some time to think about the likely questions that you're going to get, and there'll be a lot of commonalities in the questions that schools will ask. So they're going to be delving into your resume and asking a lot of follow-up questions on your professional experience and your academic experience and your extracurriculars. They're going to be analyzing your motivation for the school. They want to get a sense for your sense of fit with the school and what you want to get out of the program, and also what you bring to the community. All of the schools will be looking to assess that, and so you should really spend some time thinking carefully through your responses to those questions, and also close to the time before interviews, do get some practice. Sit down with someone who can put you through your paces, and run through some practice questions with you. Different schools, as I said, have different formats. So with some schools, you may be sitting down with an alum who has only reviewed your resume. With other schools, you may be sitting down with a member of the admissions team who has reviewed your entire file in great detail. With some schools, you may be required to do a team exercise. Other schools now also have video questions that you will do at some stage during the process that are sort of interview style questions that you will record on your computer. So start looking into that well in advance, and it can be useful for some candidates to start putting together a list of possible questions and building up a bank of ideas of your responses, and the types of examples that you would give and the strengths that you want to highlight and so on. And with some of the schools, the interviews can be quite short. It might only be barely 30 minutes. So you need to think about what are the key messages you want to get across and how you can get those messages across in a very concise manner. Moving on.
Here's an interesting discussion that we always like to have about application planning and sort of what a timeline can look like. You can see that we've put up sort of 7 months ahead, which is sort of where we are right now for round one. And as Fortuna, we really think that this kind of schedule works pretty well. You're going to start in January, February with your school research that we mentioned and the GMAT prep. Again, as Caroline mentioned, you don't really want to be taking that exam just 3 weeks before your application is due. I actually had somebody this round who took it the day that the applications needed to be submitted, and I was shaking my head and thinking, you knew you were applying to business school. You never know what's going to happen, so please do not wait till the last moment. 6 months ahead, you want to start to analyze your strengths and weaknesses. You want to think about your recommenders. You certainly at that point have enough time to mitigate anything that comes up as a weakness. So if you feel like you don't have enough leadership, or you want to get more involved in the community, or you need to take an online class, these are all things that you can really still craft 6 months ahead of the deadline. A little bit harder to do 3 months ahead of the deadline, but 6 months gives you more than enough ample time to kind of address some of the things that may be hiccups in your application. Caroline again mentioned giving yourself more than enough time to take the GMAT. And as you can see, we want you to sort of move into that finalizing your target round, getting your recommenders together, starting to work on those essays. And this is going to be happening over the summer. So early summer is really when we imagine that you would be putting your best foot forward on these kinds of issues, and starting to work on your resume, which is actually something that I said you could pretty much start now. I think that it's not a bad idea to start getting one together, and then you're going to start to edit it more heavily 3 months ahead. You're going to want to look at your social media. Make sure there's no pictures up there that you don't want to be seen. You want to make all of your filters friends only. You want to make sure that all of your email addresses are appropriate. Your LinkedIn profile is reflective of your current and past employment. A lot of times people will overlook the small details, but your picture, for example, that shows up on Google Hangouts should be something that's professional. All of these ways that academic offices and admissions offices can really check up on you, you want to make sure they're clean, they're clear, they're professional, and that your settings are all set to friends only or private. So certainly Google yourself, see what comes up, and make sure that everything is where it should be in your social media. 2 months ahead, as I mentioned, you want to get those materials together, get your transcripts together, make sure that you have all of the information necessary in order to apply. If you need proof of citizenship, we certainly suggest that you do all of these different pieces of bureaucracy before you actually go ahead and apply. It's a moment 2 months ahead to take a deep breath and not be scrambling at the end, because in the last month you're really doing all of your final review and fine-tuning. We again encourage you to give yourself a nice big lead time on this. You never know what's going to happen in the final days leading up to the application, and there's no reason for you to delay. So 7 months, I personally find this to be a terrific amount of time. You can start slow and steady, chip away at it. It does not require you to be 24 hours a day for 7 months, but it does require you to have it on your to-do list and your action list every day for 7 months.
Thank you, Judith. So we're going to move into some Q&A now, but I first of all wanted to thank you all very much for attending today, and encourage you to sign up for a free consultation with a member of the Fortuna team. We'd be very happy to discuss your individual profile and your plans for applying to business school. Haley, if you could throw up the next slide. We have a question about the importance of length of work experience, and Judith, I wondered if you could comment on, exactly how much work experience do you need for one of the top US programs?
So most schools are going to be looking for at least 2 years of work experience and probably more. The average number of years of work experience when I was at Wharton was actually a little bit higher. We were looking at between 4.5 and 5, but you certainly want to make sure that you're applying at an appropriate juncture in your academic and your professional development. So you shouldn't be applying because you don't like your job. You shouldn't be applying a year out unless you really feel like you have the requisite skills and you're going to benefit from this experience. But don't forget that you're going to be in class with people that are going to be really, really vocal and have a lot to bring to the table. So undoubtedly you want to ensure that you're going to be able to fully engage and participate in that communication and that discussion in the classroom. So I wouldn't say never for 2 years and less, but unless you're applying to one of the joint programs or the 2+2 program at Harvard or Stanford, it is going to be a little bit unusual.
Yeah. So if you have further questions, please do enter them now into the questions box on the right-hand side, because we will need to close fairly soon. We have a question about level of English. So the question is, my English is weak and I'm concerned about the essays. So I would say that, first of all, you need to make sure that your English is good enough to flourish on the MBA program, because the amount of material that you're going to be reading and have to get through is quite huge. So it does require a very high level of fluency in terms of your ability to digest large amounts of material very quickly, and then also you'll need to be presenting and discussing in classroom in front of a large group. So at this stage, I would say that should be your first concern, just making sure that your English is sufficient to really get the most out of an MBA program. And of course, you will need to be able to demonstrate your level of English through something like the TOEFL or the TOEIC, and then through the GMAT. It's difficult to get through the GMAT and do well unless your English is very strong. And when it comes to the essays, the schools understand that non-native English speakers may not have perfect English 100% of the time, and if there's a few grammatical errors here or there, it's not the end of the world. Their concern, though, is that you can make yourself understood in the English language very clearly, that you can get a message across well, that you will, because also you'll need that for the MBA program, and then for your future career, you need to be able to communicate clearly in English, both in written form and in orally. So they'll be assessing your English at the interview stage as well. So for some candidates, it is worth spending some time before applying to do an intensive English course to really get your skills up to scratch and absolutely fluent before you enter the application process. Any other questions? I think we've more or less run out of time. So if you do have further questions, please do feel free to contact us at the info@fortunaadmissions.com email address, or sign up for a free consultation, as I mentioned, and we'd be very happy to discuss your individual profile with you and answer any further questions that you have. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. Thank you very much, Judith and Haley and Melissa behind the scenes, and we look forward to being in touch with you very soon.
Thanks so much. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.